Are you looking to buy or sell real estate in Rhode Island or New Hampshire? My name's Max Willett. If you're a listener to the podcast, you already know that. But I'm licensed in both of those states. I'm proud to be in the top 20% of my brokerage in Rhode Island and a member of the Dow Group, the number one real estate team in New Hampshire. I know the ins and outs of the industry, and more importantly, I care about your unique situation. Whether you're looking for your next home or selling your current one, I'm here to help every step of the way. And if you're looking outside of Rhode Island or New Hampshire, I can connect you with top agents in your area. Please give me a call today at 401 487 4477. We'd love to chat and help you out. So before we get started, I just wanted to give you context on who the guests are in the podcast. We were a little crunched for time, so I wanted to introduce them pre-recorded, not during the recording. So we have three guests on. For context, here's a quick introduction. We have Blake Filippi, who is a former Rhode Island House Minority Leader and legal expert who represented the 36th District in Rhode Island. Bill Bartholomew is a journalist, host of the Bartholomew Town podcast. He is also known for being a musician and hosts on WPRO radio station every once in a while. And lastly, we have Ken Block, who we're very familiar with. We just had him on. He's a software engineer and entrepreneur who ventured into politics, founding the Moderate Party of Rhode Island. So if you want to learn more about them, I've had all three of them on in the past. Go listen to those episodes. But yeah, enjoy today's. Knowledge is power is where you come to hear people's life experiences to learn from. So, without further ado, let's roll the intro.
Stay hungry, stay foolish.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
I have a dream. Will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
And welcome back to the Knowledge is Power podcast. This is your host, Max Willett, and today's episode is going to be a little different from the norm. We've had each of these three incredible guests on before, but never together. Today we have Bill Bartholomew, Ken Block, and after a long time, Blake Filippi back on the show. This episode might get a little controversial, maybe even a little heated, but I promise it's going to be packed with valuable insights. With only 2 weeks left until the presidential election, today's discussion couldn't be more timely. Bill, Ken, and Blake all are deeply knowledgeable in the nuances of political strategy, and they know what it takes to run an effective campaign. We're going to explore the potential paths to victory for each candidate and break down the most important issues shaping this election. Whether you're closely following the race or just tuning in, this conversation is packed with insights you won't want to miss. So thank you guys for coming on to the show today. If you just want to, speak really quickly so everybody knows your voices. So Ken, go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
That's Ken. And then Blake.
Hi, everyone. Look forward to the next hour-ish.
Yes. And then Bill.
Hi, everybody. Likewise, looking forward to it.
All right, great. So I just wanted to establish sort of a baseline of the national polling averages right now. I looked this morning and it has Harris up around 1%. And something else we're going to talk about a little bit later is the betting market. And right now on Polymarket, it has Trump at winning the election with a 65% chance. So my first question is going to be to Bill. And I want to talk about how Kamala Harris ended up as a Democratic nominee. So can you break down the process and the key events that led to her selection and maybe shed some light on the dynamics behind this decision?
Well, I mean, I have no more insight than anybody else in terms of access or anything like that. It's pretty clear what happened. Political parties are private organizations, no different than, the Lions Club or the local Pee Wee football team in terms of their constitutionality or anything like that. Clearly, President Biden the whole country saw it after that first debate. And people in and around Washington had been talking about this for a while, that the president was just not fit to continue on from the standpoint of being most effective to beat Donald Trump. So, there's a lot of mechanical reasons why Harris was elevated internally into that role. The most obvious being that she's the vice president. The fundraising that had happened on that ticket, the Biden fundraising, could easily be transferred to her account. And also, hey, look, she was in the right place at the right time. And that's, at the end of the day, the real reason why it happened. That was a democracy that somebody who, granted, was elected as vice president, was on a winning ticket, who has had a career as a successful candidate. Is it pure democracy that she obtained that role? No, but it's the nature of the beast. And that's how she ended up there. Right place, right time. Mechanically, it just worked out for her.
Yeah. Do you guys have any comments on that?
Yeah, I don't see anything nefarious about it at all. It's for the longest time, political parties didn't really have primaries. They just picked their candidates in a smoky back room, back in the 50s and whatnot. So, it was very clear that President Biden couldn't run again. He just didn't have the mental capacity to do the job. Everyone lost confidence in him. And the right thing to do was to replace him for the good of the country. Maybe not for the good of the campaign from President Trump's perspective, but in every other way, we need capable candidates vying for the job. And President Biden, unfortunately, failed the test.
Let me ask you this question, guys. If he can't run a campaign effectively, why should he still be able to run the country?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'll respond to the first question and then answer that one if I could, please.
Okay.
So, yes, political parties are private organizations. And yes, they used to appoint people through a delegate process where there were no primaries. But I think in this case, we have primaries in this country. We as taxpayers pay for the Democratic and Republican primaries. And no matter what the facts are, and I think we can dispute when it became apparent that Joe Biden wasn't competent to run another campaign. I think it was much earlier. And just in my opinion and observations, I think the problem with the situation is that it avoided a Democratic primary. And part of me thinks that that was actually by design. I think if Joe Biden had announced he wouldn't run maybe 6 months before, there would have been an active campaign where the principles of democracy could have led to the selection of the Democratic candidate. And I just think in this case, we can all surmise, but at least from my perspective, it was apparent to me over a year ago that Joe Biden was infirm. And unfortunately, I think that might have been known by a lot of people within the administration and the political parties, the political party, the Democratic Party. And they just really wanted to avoid a primary. So I think this might have been a little more by design than just right place, right time for Kamala, or, it was all just happenstance. Like, I think.
Although Biden didn't really leave willingly. He fought pretty hard to keep it, which I think argues against the by design argument. I think that he saw that the donors abandoned him. He saw that elected officials abandoned him. Even Barack Obama abandoned him, right? I mean, he was a man alone by the end of the 2 weeks post-debate. I think if he had had any kind of support, he probably would have stayed in. I don't think he wanted to drop out. I think he was forced to.
Yeah, and I think if he was forced, then those people who were doing the forcing should have been doing the forcing a year ago, so we would have had a primary process. I think everything you're describing may be true, right? It's like if you do have something by design, you've got to put forth a really good story. But when I saw that early debate, I think it was in June with Trump, kind of my spidey sense stood up and was like, whoa, what's going on here? And it turned out that he was replaced. I think he even tweeted about it. I mean, I guess all of us, all we can do is surmise. We don't have inside information, but I think no matter what, it's unfortunate we did not have a Democratic primary.
I think also it's important to think back to 2020 when you can take a look at how did Joe Biden become the nominee. in a year where Bernie Sanders was really, in all senses, at minimum, building a significant momentum until a consolidation within the Democratic Party. You had that day where everybody dropped out, Klobuchar, Buttigieg, so on and so forth. Everybody dropped out and threw their support around Biden around Super Tuesday, as if the party said, well, wait a second, we can't have Sanders win, so we're going to go with Biden. This whole thing is, the idea that it is perfect democracy from start to finish, that everybody's vote is really determining every aspect of who becomes the nominee. It's a little bit of a fairy tale. The party power brokers ultimately, just like at the state level, have a lot of influence in terms of who actually becomes the candidate. It's not rigged. It's not that it's, purely nefarious, but there's always something to it more than just, hey, more people voted for this person than that person. There's always a preliminary set of facts that lead to who's actually on the ballot and who's getting the push from the party via endorsements or otherwise.
Right. All great points. But just to reiterate my follow-up question to that question, you talked about how, that Joe Biden was not competent enough to be running in a campaign. Why is he still able to be president? To Blake, I think you said you were going to answer that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know his abilities within to read, to absorb, to digest information and make the best decision. I don't know what his capabilities for that are. I know his capabilities for communication are severely curtailed, and it makes me concerned about his analytical decision-making capabilities. So I truly don't know, but I think being able to effectively communicate is an important thing, both domestically and internationally. So I think they maybe could assert the 25th Amendment, but I'm not in the room to see his ability to analyze and digest information. If that is compromised in the world we live in, I think he needs to be immediately removed. But I just don't know where he's at.
Before we move on, do you guys have any comments?
President Reagan suffered from Alzheimer's the last couple of years he was president. You could have made the argument that he was compromised in some ways. I watched President Trump on the campaign trail, and he has long periods of time where I question how lucid he really is. Right? I mean, I think part of the challenge we have here is we have extremely old candidates who are suffering from common issues that, as people age, that they bump up against. It's not a game or a profession or an endeavor like a nationwide campaign that is very kind to your body. And I think that we should seriously consider age limits to who runs for president, because if someone who's 75 wins and then they encounter problems as they age in office, none of us should be subject to that. And so, we again, I think it's really hard to remove a president for cause. We know that in the past, while there was some cause in different times, that nobody pulled the trigger on something so substantial. I don't think Biden has lost all of his cognition. I've heard him speak at times where he was quite lucid. What you do in a debate is really different than what you do affecting policy. So I don't think we can directly tie debate performance to the ability to do the job in office. But the debate performance was bad enough that there's just no way he could have asked for another 4 years.
Yeah, and look, I've never met Joe Biden. I've never been in a room with Joe Biden, but I've talked to a couple of people who have been in the last few months, people who are state elected officials, people who are in our federal delegation. And I've asked that same question, like, hey, what do you think? What's your read on this? I mean, honestly, we can go off the record like that level. And honestly, I've heard time and time again that while there certainly is a diminishment of communication abilities, the idea that he has all out dementia and is completely incapable of governing is just not true. For example, one of the people I spoke with said that they've met the president a few times, and when they walked into not the Oval Office, but whatever room they were meeting in, he immediately remembered him, knew his name, was able to identify this issue that is happening in the state right now, the bridge, and get into a discussion about it. Pulling that out of your filing cabinet shows that you're not completely unable to process what's happening in front of you. At the same time, to Ken's point, I think it's concerning anytime, it doesn't really matter what age, but anytime you don't feel that level of solidified inspiration, maybe not inspirational, but when there's any question about a person's capability to be a leader in any capacity, whether it's the quarterback of a football team or whatever, it just creates a narrative that's disruptive, and we've got to find ways to kind of avoid that in the future, I think.
Yeah, and I'll respond just to the notion of age limits. Like, I just don't think you can do it. The age limit really is the 25th Amendment, and that's the only way to really do it. You can't say anyone over 80 can't be a president. You have to rely on the people who are in the cabinet and the vice president to make that determination. So that's the age limit.
Okay, great. Thank you for making all those points. Limited time, so I'd like to move on to the next topic. So this next question will start with Ken. So I mentioned earlier that Trump currently leads at a 65% chance of winning, according to the betting markets, in particular Polymarket. Do you give these companies any validity to what might actually happen in the election? Because a lot of people are talking about it.
Well, sure, they're talking about it, but are you aware that two individuals are responsible for most of the pro-Trump betting to the tune of 30, 40, $50 million of bets? So the Poly market it's not even a good odds predictor, because a few very rich individuals have tilted and skewed and warped the odds by placing heavy bets on Trump. If one person bets $1 billion that Trump's going to win, he's going to have 100% odds of winning in Polymarket. It doesn't mean a damn thing. So you don't put any credibility in anything like that. In fact, I don't believe you can put a lot of credibility in the polls, because we all know that the race is tighter than the margin of error of most polls. So every poll that comes out that's breathlessly reporting, oh my gosh, Trump is up 1/10 of a point here and there and everything. Polls are blunt instruments. They're not sharp instruments. And depending on who they talk to that day and everything, you're really not able to make any determination within 3 or 4 percentage points of what's actually happening. And most importantly, the folks who haven't yet made up their mind is the whole ball game. And when they're telling the pollsters, we don't yet know who we're going to vote for, that's what the 6-7% is that's left over after you take Trump and Harris off the table. That's it. With the exception of third parties, the Libertarians in 2020 in Georgia and Pennsylvania and Arizona and Wisconsin took way more votes than Trump lost by in those states. So I think that you have to look at the Libertarians carefully. You have to look to see if the Green Party does better than they did in 2020. And last and most importantly, you've got to look at the rhinos who Trump doesn't want and is kicked out. They were they were absolutely why he lost in 2020. Now we call them Nikki Haley voters, and Trump hasn't solved that problem, and I think they could do him in again.
Yeah, great points, and we'll get onto polling later, but do you guys have any comments on the Polymarket betting systems?
I agree with Ken. I mean, to me, it's not even something that I look at in analyzing the election, just because of the influence, the outsized influence of a small amount of individuals. And frankly, a lot of that is tied to, at times, some of the markets are tied to Bitcoin. And we've seen a concerted effort by the Trump world to include that, I guess what you'd call that sort of new financial technology sector. In fact, that's one of the reasons why J.D. Vance is there. He was really pushed by Peter Thiel out of Silicon Valley in that space. So there's an oversized influence both in terms of dollars. There's an oversized influence both in terms of angle and perception. I don't know. And I agree. I mean, look, what's happening in Erie County, Pennsylvania, what's happening in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, that's where this is going to come down to. It really makes no difference. National polling, it's a snapshot in time, as Joe Fleming, the state of Rhode Island's leading pollster, would say. And, you can listen to Bloomberg radio if you want to fall asleep in the middle of the day. You can sit there like a complete nerd like me and listen to Bloomberg radio for 15 minutes and hear a variety of CEOs come on and say, well, I'm hearing that Trump is going to win this thing, so we're preparing for X, Y, and Z. I mean, who knows at this point? It's like sports talk. This is like the third sports analogy I've made, but it's just a pointless endeavor to sit there and worry about who's going to bat fifth in a potential matchup in July, when the Reds play the Yankees. I mean, who cares? Two, it's not an effective way to analyze what's happening on the ground right now. Only county by county polling in those key swing counties is what actually will influence the outcome. Or not influence, will predict the outcome.
Although I do want to caution you, Bill, because across every Georgia county, save maybe 10, and there's 167 Georgia counties, Trump lost. He did less well in 2020 than he did in 2016. You have to poll the whole swing state because the one county doesn't tell the whole story. Trump lost 100,000 votes in the red counties alone in Georgia in 2020. And that's 6-7 times the number of votes that he lost by.
That's
so
a great
Max. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I thought you were done, Ken. Please finish.
I am done. I just stop me anytime. I just keep going.
No, I don't want to stop you. I want to wait until that you okay, so you're done. As it relates to the betting markets, essentially what I think Ken and Bill have implied is that the House is using a bad deck of cards. If that's the case, it should be given no weight. If they are using a good deck of cards, if there isn't outside influence affecting nefariously the betting market, I think casinos know their numbers. And I'm just going to say it's interesting. It doesn't mean the elect. I don't really think it means much in the next 2 weeks, but it is interesting to look at. And if it's a legit full deck of cards, I think it should be definitely looked at as like the sentiment.
Great. Thank you for making those points. And so this sort of perfectly sways into the next topic, which is polling. And I'm going to start with Bill on this one. And polling has occasionally underestimated Trump's support. For example, in 2016, Pennsylvania polls showed Clinton leading by 46.3% to Trump's 42.4%. But Trump ended up winning the state by more than 1%. In 2020, Wisconsin had Biden up by 8.4. He won the state by only 0.63%. Given how close this race is shaping up to be, should the Harris campaign be concerned about potential polling inaccuracies? And could this suggest that Trump is on track to perform even better in key states than current polls indicate?
No, it could suggest anything, right? I think back to the New York Times on Election Day. I remember waking up on Election Day in 2016, and the New York Times, they got rid of it after this, but they had some kind of barometer which showed the likelihood of how a candidate would perform. They had Clinton at 96% likely to win the election that morning. When I left to vote, I remember looking at that and thinking, is it even worth voting? It's Rhode Island, doesn't matter anyway. That whole look, polling, it's interesting. Certainly worth paying attention to the Real Clear Politics aggregate. Certainly worth paying attention to everything. But neither candidate should be is polling in such a way that it would make either campaign feel like we've got this thing locked down. Who knows what's going to happen? I mean, literally, this is I hate to use the term, but a razor thin margin in the key swing states right now. And nobody should be, with 2 weeks to go, feeling good about their chances, nor should they be feeling dismal about it, in my opinion. And we will see. I think the one thing I will say is, in terms of undecided voters, that's what is the big factor here. How many people at this point are truly undecided that are actually going to vote or have already voted in early voting, that number to me, it would seem like it's much lower than the margins of or the represented undecided voters are in a lot of these polls. So I wonder if there's people who are either embarrassed to say they voted or are going to vote for Trump or Harris, and they're not answering truthfully because they think they're being recorded or something like that. So I think that's the real question mark at this point in time. How many people really are undecided? I would say it's less than polling represents, but that's totally anecdotal.
Any comments?
Blake?
You're on mute, Blake. Blake, you're muted.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I think anyone will tell you polling is an art, and the Miss Trump voters in 16 or the Miss Biden voters in 20, that's something that pollsters attempt to adjust for and say, okay, we have to make sure they're part of our sample. In order to really understand a poll, you need to read like the 90 pages after it. They're called the crosstabs. I haven't done that for any of these polls. Past this prologue, the polls are probably wrong. I don't believe it's nefarious, but they're certainly not playing with a full deck either.
Yeah. So in 2016, the reason the polls were wrong was Trump motivated a ton of first-time voters that never voted before, to come out and give him their vote. Polls don't talk to those voters because they're not likely voters. So that's why they were wrong. In 20, interestingly, Trump again motivated a ton of first-time voters to come out and vote, but this time they came out to vote against him. And I say this with some authority because Trump's pollster made those determinations for the campaign with a 30,000 sample exit poll in 2020 in the swing states. 1 out of 6 voters were brand new voters who voted against Trump out of those 30,000. Another 1 out of 6 were Republicans who abandoned Trump. Those are your rhinos. So, you know, it's really hard to sample with polls such a tiny sliver, but it's a hugely important sliver. You can't possibly determine who's going to vote for the first time. And if you do manage to identify moderate Republicans, they may or may not tell you who they're going to vote for due to all the pressures that are out there to, you know, be loyal to the party, that kind of stuff. So, yeah, the polls really aren't capable of telling us what's about to happen, but it sure is giving an awful lot of people acid reflux.
All great points. So, next topic. So, Blake, this one starts with you. So, obviously, the U.S. operates within a capitalist economy. And in past elections, the debate has been often about how to maximize the potential of that system. However, with some of the proposals from Harris and the Democrats, it seems that they may be considering policies that lean toward a different type of economic model. Do you think it's accurate to frame this election as a choice between capitalism and a more socialist-leaning approach?
Sure. I think it's fair. I think that it's fair that that's like one of the sub-issues in a broader issue. It's really about, I think, about freedom versus the state, and whether we move towards a socialist way of doing things or a capital way of doing things is really an extension of that overlying question, that overlying tension that frankly has been the tension for 2,000 years of human history. So yes, I think it's fair to frame it as capitalist versus socialist, but I think ultimately it's freedom versus the state. And in my opinion, the fact that every 4 years such drastic changes can happen to critical parts of our lives means I think we need to long-term look at the power of Washington, D.C., because if 10,000 votes in Pennsylvania can change the way Rhode Islanders live, I just think it's a problem. It takes away our self-determination as a people in this state. And I think we need to look at what type of powers the federal government's going to have in the future. I think many of them should be returned to the state so we have control and we're not subject to these massive shifts every 4 years based on what some other states decide in a presidential election.
Comments?
You know, Bill Clinton had one of the most successful economies of any recent president. I don't believe that party necessarily determines the economy. I can give you firsthand evidence that the tariffs that Trump put on aluminum, raw aluminum imports, cost my traffic signal manufacturing business. I was forced to raise my prices 25% to match the cost of the tariffs that he placed on the raw materials. There are some elements to what Trump wants to do economically that I believe would be hideously horrible for our economy. And most economists agree, especially when it comes to tariffs. So I don't know that you can look at either candidate and say, that's the one who we can be confident won't hurt our economy. I believe both of them can actually cause our economy a lot of damage. And I would love to see both of them move away from the most harmful policies that they're proposing.
I mean, here's my take on this, and it's in terms of when I hear people say, well, the Harris campaign is they've got these socialist ideas, or they're communists, or whatever it is. When you talk about the Republican Party and when you talk about the Democratic Party, you're talking about actually the business party. You're talking about the party of the business class, corporate class. They're separate wings of that broader entity. Neither one of these parties are working class people's parties. If they were, they would have completely different leading tenets that were much, much more in line with what, and even beyond some of what we see in Europe or what we see in some of Latin America. I mean, let's be honest about it. They're controlled by the billionaire class. So the distinction between the two of them a lot of times ends up being superficial, or proposals and things of that sort. Neither campaign is promising free healthcare. Neither campaign is looking to nationalize utilities. Neither campaign is looking to basically offer free college education. Neither campaign is looking to do any of the most entry level of what would be technically socialistic type of policies and practices. It's not like Noam Chomsky or Naomi Klein are running for president here. And so it's just a complete, I think it goes both ways. Is Donald Trump going to get elected and become a dictator on day one and that whole business? I mean, no. Is Kamala Harris, if she were to be elected, all of a sudden going to turn us into Cuba? No. But we also have to remember Russia, for example, was not really communist. It was an autocracy. Same with Cuba. People lose track of their definitions. And by the way, socialism, the next time, I mean, this is obviously entry level, but the next time your house is on fire and the fire department shows up, that's socialism. That's real socialism. And in terms of our economic direction, I'd be more concerned about things like tariffs and actual practical economic instruments that are imposed. The system is not going to change overnight. The business class won't allow it, period.
Yeah, and I really like this conversation. I just want to mention tariffs too. Like, I look at it this way with tariffs: they can be abused or they can be great. How can American workers compete against countries that don't have minimum wages, don't have worker safeties, don't have environmental regulations on the extraction of raw materials? I think that we should have free trade with people who are on our level, who have workers' comp requirements, who have an economy similar to ours or building towards it. But I don't think we should have free trade with countries that pay their people pennies on the dollars to compete against American workers. So I think we have to be really smart with tariffs and do it with more fair trade than free trade. But I think tariffs are okay on countries that don't offer worker protection or enough pay or have environmental concerns about the way they extract materials.
Yeah. Ken, you mentioned earlier you had a traffic sign business, and how you had to increase the cost. So what was stopping you from moving manufacturing to the United States? Was it purely just cost? Would it have been more to produce it in the United States even after the tariffs?
There still remains very few producers of domestic aluminum. Most of our aluminum is imported. And when the tariffs went on, everybody had to pony up to 25%, which is all passed along as cost to every manufacturer who had to import aluminum and pay 25% more for their raw materials, pass that cost right along to their customers. And this is what frustrates me with Trump. He says, well, that doesn't happen. Of course it happens. When businesses have increased costs, they always pass it along to their paying customers. That's how it goes. So there are, in most cases, you're going to find that what we are going to be placing tariffs on cannot magically overnight start being successfully processed or manufactured here in this country. It just doesn't work that way. It takes a long time to set up brand new manufacturing capacity. It's expensive. You need to get the right employees, the right training, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It takes years to stand up a new smelter, for example. It doesn't happen in the course of a couple months. So when those tariffs go in, it is immediate and instant inflationary pressure because cost has to go up. And, I believe strongly that government should have a light touch. And when you start monkeying around with businesses with tariffs and you're swinging costs all over the place, that is an exceedingly heavy touch. And I don't believe we have any business getting into it.
Fascinating. So yeah, Ken, I think like the fact that you're having to purchase aluminum from outside the country, I think shows that there's a problem. And I think that is the result of our international trade policy, which didn't use tariffs and had more free trade with foreign countries. I think that this really fixing something of raw materials such as aluminum isn't something that's immediate. And I think that tariffs can be used as part of a broader program to onshore that raw material production, possibly with government subsidies to build up a new smelter taken from those tariffs. So we didn't get here in a year, you not being able to get aluminum in the United States. And I don't think we're going to get out of it in a year. I think we need a broad, maybe say decade-long policy of how do we onshore not just finished goods like computers and whatnot, but actual raw materials like aluminum. The fact that you can't get that domestically shows we have a huge problem here that we need to fix. We need to be able to produce our own aluminum in this country.
Well, why are we only looking at manufacturing then? So in my industry, so my employees have to compete against a whole bunch of engineers in India who get paid 10, 12, 15 bucks an hour. And I'm paying my folks anywhere up to $100+ an hour. Are we going to start adding tariffs to cheap labor outside of manufacturing? I think that you end up, the reason that we've been relatively stable on the world scene in a large extent is because of the interdependency of countries on each other. You don't go to war with countries that you trade with. And so by instituting tariffs, you're essentially igniting trade wars, and there's going to be retaliatory tariffs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's very destabilizing. Geopolitically, I don't think that the price is worth what we gain by trying to reshore some things. If we had an ability to be competitive, we would be building it here. Where we don't, we need to be moving on to other things. And it is free market through and through. And I believe that free markets work, and attempts to monkey with free markets, more often than not, they're not going to give you the result that they intend.
I think you're totally right, Ken. I think that tariffs are a tool of foreign policy. It's one part of our foreign policy analysis when dealing on the international stage, and that tariffs are one consideration as we make international policy decisions. Certainly, I don't think we should put on a tariff which harms our international interests. I respectfully suggest that our international interests can be advanced with intelligent use of tariff policy, where it's one tool in the overall toolbox of international relations for our country.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, guys. I just would like to move on to the next topic, which is something I find very interesting. So I don't know, we could start with Bill here. So Tim Walz, like Hillary Clinton before him, has suggested that the Electoral College should be dismantled. Can you explain the reasoning behind that viewpoint and what the potential benefits or drawbacks might be to such a change. And he said that, I believe, in California while on the campaign trail.
Well, the reason why he would say that, or Hillary Clinton would say that, is because if you take a look at the election maps going back at least, I can't tell you for sure, but I would guess it until at least Reagan 84. Again, that's a guess. Democrats win the popular vote every time. And so, again, I guess somebody can fact check me on that if they'd like. But in recent years, Democrats win the popular vote. So it's natural that Democrats would say, let's get rid of the system that has, kept us out of the White House on a basically permanent basis. The arguments to keep the Electoral College are something that I haven't personally thought about in great detail. I would say my instinct is that, like many of the aspects of our system, they were designed at a time that is much different than now, in terms of the logistics and practicality of where people live and so on and so forth. We would benefit in Rhode Island if we abolished the Electoral College, because all 4 of our votes would be the same as the Allegheny County, Erie County, Pennsylvania voter. I think the most straightforward process for any type of election is the best system. And from that standpoint, I would personally be in favor of abolition of the Electoral College system. But there are scholars who have made arguments to the contrary that I've heard, and they make compelling arguments as well. So it's not something that I personally have much of a take on, but it makes sense why Democrats would say, hey, wait a second, we would have won in 2016 if it weren't for this Electoral College. We would be in control. When you take a look at the red states in this country, they tend to have a little bit less population overall. There's a lot of space that is farmland and unoccupied space. So these gigantic states are oftentimes going red, but have, less population than the megapolis or the Pacific coast. So that's a pretty poor description from my end of what the Electoral College argument is, because I'm not that informed on it beyond just that cursory level, but it's what I've got.
Yeah, I think being a small state in this country, we are empowered as Rhode Islanders. Basically the same way we have 4 representatives in Congress, 2 senators, 2 reps for 1 million people. We have the same outsized strength in our vote in the Electoral College as a small state. So just from a structural perspective, as a Rhode Islander, I wouldn't support it because we'd be giving away power. We at that point would only have, 1/330th of the power, 1 million people in a country of 330 million. Whereas now, just like in the Senate, where we control 2% of the Senate, but we're 1/330th of the population, it's the same kind of way in the Electoral College. We have that much outsized voting power as a small state. So I wouldn't, as Rhode Islanders, support it. And I also just think structurally, from a much broader perspective, the Electoral College keeps the country together. I really think that if there was a constitutional amendment to somehow get rid of the Electoral College, not do this, state by state laws to apportion their votes differently, but to actually eliminate the Electoral College, or practically or effectively, I think that a lot of small states in this country might not want to participate in the experiment anymore. And I think that's the problem with the notion of getting rid of the Electoral College and going to popular vote. And therefore, I don't think it's ever going to happen. It just seems like something that gets people riled up.
Yeah, it's an academic question that's pointless, because the only way to get rid of the Electoral College is to amend the Constitution. It's never going to happen because more than half the states, as Blake said, benefit from it. I mean, smaller states get outsized pull, which is the argument against keeping it, right? And, if you look at it from a Democrat's perspective, you have what is in effect minority governance is what we had while Trump was the president. And in his own words, elections have consequences. Well, he's implementing his consequences, and he's having his way with the courts and with what a lot of people considered fairly extreme policies. and he didn't win the popular vote. So it's a legitimate beef to question. And look, we didn't used to have this problem, right? When Republicans won in the past, and they did so without the popular vote, they weren't trying to govern like they won in a landslide. But now we have consequential elections, and if you have power, you're going to do anything and everything you want as if the other side doesn't even exist. And I think that that is just part of the hyperpartisanship that we suffer from now. And if we didn't have the hyperpartisanship, it wouldn't be so problematic that you have minority governance with a party that's not winning the popular vote. So while we have extreme politics, I think the minority governance and the idea of consequential elections is terrifying, interestingly, to the majority of the country. And that's not a good thing. And the only solution I see to it is to step back from the hyperpartisanship that we have right now.
Okay, great. Yeah. So a couple more topics and we'll start wrapping up. So this topic is something that's fairly new and just came out last night. And so this Friday, we're recording this on the 23rd of October. Donald Trump is slotted to go onto the Joe Rogan podcast. And I think it's pretty obvious who I'm going to ask this question to. Bill, what sort of effect do you... What sort of effect do you think that's going to be? I mean, as another podcaster, how do you think that's going to affect this election cycle?
It's interesting. Look, Joe Rogan is certainly the biggest media personality in the quote unquote alternative landscape right now. I listen to just about every episode of Joe Rogan's podcast. Sometimes I do it because it's an interesting guest. Sometimes I do it because I like to moan and groan while I'm driving to New York back at the radio. I find it to be an extremely important show that's changed the way that podcasts are perceived in a business sense, for sure. And this is sort of the crowning achievement of what has been the media strategy of both campaigns, which is to go to both the legacy media, the CBS, the Fox, the CNN, go into the alternative spaces, be it the Call Her Daddy podcast or the Joe Rogan, and to go into the local markets, which is where a lot of these decisions are made. Now, the thing about Joe Rogan is I haven't seen any demographics breakdowns, but I would guess that his audience is predominantly male. I would guess that his audience is predominantly centrist or right wing. And I would guess that Trump is going to be in a little bit of an echo chamber. And it'll be interesting to see. Joe Rogan actually has a big moment here. Does Joe Rogan solidify his position as credible in his line of questioning to Trump? Or do they just kind of kick back and turn this thing into a loose, basically non-journalistic type of exercise? Now, Rogan's already said he's not a journalist. I would actually refute that. I would say that he kind of is a journalist because of the changing definitions of journalism. It's huge, but much like when Trump goes to a college football game at Alabama and waves to the crowd, he's kind of speaking to his own audience. It'd be more interesting if Kamala Harris were to appear on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. That would actually be the scenario that would have more of a broader change impact, in my opinion.
Comments?
Yeah, I think it's great. I can't wait to watch it. I hope Kamala goes on, and I think I don't think it'll be an echo chamber for either candidate. I think Mr. Rogan has pretty broad, outside the traditional two-party system appeal. I think he even endorsed Bernie Sanders 6 or 8 years ago, or 4 or 8 years ago. He definitely does not have conventional views, so I think it would be great. And I think he's the type of person who asks hard questions. I hope he is. I don't think he's going to let Trump or Kamala skate. I think he's going to really try to get down to the nut of the issue. Frankly, more than our debates. Our debates really don't have follow-up questions. I think that Joe Rogan will ask a lot of follow-up questions.
Great. Ken, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, it's not going to make a difference. I don't think anybody who's listening to Joe Rogan they've all probably pretty much made up their minds. I find it interesting that Trump is bailing on all manner of interviews, and then he decided to do this one. it makes me believe that he might be getting some softball questions instead. Hopefully that's not the case. Uh, I'm watching him carefully, and his fastball is slower and slowing. And so, we'll see how the last couple of weeks go. But I find it amusing that he's going on Rogan and he's not going on 60 Minutes.
Yeah, Rogan gets like 100 million views, Ken. And 60 Minutes even said why he wasn't. And I understand they were wrong about the Hunter Biden laptop 4 years ago. They never did a retraction on the way they questioned him about it. I wouldn't want to go back on 60 Minutes either. Put all that aside, the Joe Rogan podcast has hundreds of millions of views compared to 60 Minutes. And really, it's like, I know the demographic. I don't think we know all the demographic. I'm like a 40-ish guy. It's like it's not just Republicans. He has many, I would say, liberal positions that I think some of my friends on the other side would agree with too. So I think it's effective. I really do hope Kamala goes on too. I think it would be wonderful. It'd be one heck of a show. I think it'd be really interesting for the American people to hear these conversations.
What we should see is the two of them go head to head again.
Oh, on Joe Rogan.
No, in a formal debate. Have a debate. The fact that Trump's not debating at this point, I find ironic, because he was giving Biden a lot of crap, and now all of a sudden he's the one that's skating on debates. So if we're going to do this and we're going to have a tough, close election, the candidates should give us every opportunity to hear them go right up against each other, and we're being denied that opportunity.
Yeah, kind of like the Democratic primary this year.
Okay. Yeah, great. All right. So I'm going to put all you guys on the spot. I know we're pressed for time, but I'm going to put you on the spot, and I'm going to ask for your predictions to end the podcast. All right. Who do you think is going to win? Ken?
The rhinos are going to do Trump in again like they did in 2020. The problem has been left unresolved. And if anything, more rhinos have left post January 6th. And as Trump's messaging has gotten far more extreme this cycle than it was before. So you can't win a race by narrowing your base of support. And he's chased away some voters and have tried to bring them back. Call them Nikki Haley, call them rhinos, whatever. But they're not going to give Trump their votes. And I think that's going to be why he loses.
Blake?
I have no idea. Just, it's one heck of a show. Enjoy it. Remember that our neighbors, if they're Republican or Democrat, are all our friends.
Right. I got to put you on the spot,
we're so much better than our stupid politics. Jump on.
All right. Bill, you going to make a prediction?
If I was being honest with the anecdotal, nonsensical, non-scientific feeling that I get, and everybody knows about feelings, my feeling is that it is Trump's race to lose. But the logical part of what Ken just said, and when you narrow your base, the question I have is how many of the old school Democrats who are in their 70s and 80s who feel like the country's slipping away, and they're going to come out and they're going to rally all their friends in a way that maybe they're not new voters, but they're voters who have been apathetic and maybe not consistent voters in swing states. That's where Trump could win this thing. Maybe it's also because I answer the phones at WPRO in the afternoon, and throughout the day I get all kinds of maniacs that call up, and very few people who offer any sort of scientific perspective on elections. But I'm also with Blake in that, at the end of the day, it has huge consequences in our lives. There's no doubt about it. But there's also an element of it that's sort of entertainment, cartoonish. And at the end of the day, I'm going to wake up in the morning and go outside and take a deep breath of the beautiful Providence air and, get to work in my various businesses and projects and, write songs and go look at the ocean and maybe go out to Block Island and see Blake, or over to the East Bay and see Ken. And that's it. My life, I'm not going to let it change my life. And I'm privileged enough that I can make that statement. However, there are people who can't make that statement there are consequences to the election for some people. I really believe that.
Right. Thank you so much, guys, for sharing your opinions and coming on. I've had such a great conversation. I've learned a lot. I want to respect everybody's time, so it is time to end. So thank you guys for coming on.
Thanks, Max.
Yeah, thank
Thanks,
you. And
Max.
thank you guys all for tuning into the Knowledge is Power podcast. Hope you guys learned a lot, and we will catch you in the next one. If you've made it to the end of this episode, thank you so much. I'm going to talk to you off script here because I just wanted to say, I think this conversation we just had shows that you can have civil discussions with people who you disagree with. Ken, Blake, and Bill all come from different viewpoints. Ken founded the Moderate Party. Blake's a Republican. And if you listen to Bill on WPRO, you'll know where he stands. But they're all great people, and they all like and respect each other. And they talked to each other civilly. You can see it. Yes, they disagreed, but they walked away from this conversation and they're still going to like each other. And for me, that's one of the biggest takeaways from this conversation. And I hope you guys learned something about the election that you already didn't know about. And something else I wanted to talk about was how important it is for you to vote, not in the presidential election, but your local elections. Everybody talks about the presidential election, but in your local area, make sure you're educated on the people who are running and go vote for the people who you want to vote for, because locally, they'll make a lot more of an impact on your day-to-day lives. So look into your local legislature, look who is voting, running, and vote. So thank you guys. Thank you for listening. And I was really excited to record this episode. So I'm going to be recording some more content in the future, so make sure to watch out for that. Please leave us a review. We greatly appreciate it.